I'm Mike Uyak. I love to try new things, and I've had culinary adventures all around the world as well as right at home. I've had really wonderful food, as well as some really horrible food. I'd like to share some of my adventures with you, and we'll see if I have what it takes to fix whatever goes wrong. This is Recipe Redemption. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Recipe Redemption. Today, a somewhat controversial ingredient, and an even more controversial recipe to redeem. I speak of this ingredient, blood. No. We've all grown up with an almost inbred squeamishness toward blood, but if you simply look at it as just another tissue, albeit one more liquid in nature, it really shouldn't be all that scary. I realize that there are cultural taboos surrounding blood, and some religions can't touch this stuff, and that's fine. But for the rest of us, it may be time to reconsider our attitude toward blood as a source of food. Let's look at pigs for a minute. The average adult pig has about 1.25 gallons of blood in it at maturity. And when this little piggy goes to market, the blood is the first thing that's removed. Now, some of the blood is processed into blood meal and added to things like animal feed and fertilizer, while some blood is used to produce a variety of medical products. And about a third, 30%, does end up in food. The blood byproducts are used as emulsifiers, clarifiers, thickening agents, coloring additives, or just for nutrition, as blood is rich in iron and lots of protein. But a lot of it ends up going down the drain. If the blood from half of the estimated 120 million pigs that are slaughtered every year in the US alone is dumped into the sewer, that's over 1 million tons of blood we're wasting every year. Add to that the blood from every other domesticated animal that we slaughter for food, and that's a whole lot of potential nutrition we're wasting. If only we could conserve it and find a use for it all. We're slowly getting there. Numerous ethnic cuisines already use blood in some of their traditional recipes, from black pudding or blood sausages in Northern Europe to curdled blood jelly in China, and the blood added as a thickener and flavoring agent in soups like pho in Vietnam and ket dio in Thailand. Some chefs are starting to explore the uses for blood in the modern restaurant kitchen. Because blood contains the protein albumin, just like egg whites, it can be used almost 1-for-1 as a replacement for egg white. So those of us who have egg allergies might be able to once again enjoy recipes that require them for things like mousses and meringues. And adding blood to recipes can add richness and texture, while also giving an iron boost to those who tend to run on the anemic side. There are hurdles, of course. The ick factor notwithstanding, blood spoils quickly. So you have to do something with it and consume it pretty soon after getting it home. It is the perfect bacterial medium. That's why a lot of biotechnology companies buy a lot of blood products, because it's a good growth medium for bacteria, fungi, just about everything. It also tends to have a strong metallic flavor when it's cooked. So it needs to be used in recipes that have enough strong flavors in it to cover that up. And unlike egg whites, it's red. And once cooked, it can color the final dish anything from a grayish brown to almost black, depending on how it's prepared. So you're probably not making angel food cake with it, but something with a lot of chocolate, absolutely fantastic. There's a richness, an almost umami flavor that it contributes to your dinner guests will never guess. This recipe, however, will not help the argument for more blood on our menus. Remember the lutefisk pudding episode? The same cookbook that contained the recipe for the lutefisk pudding also has 2 recipes for blood bologna. So you knew I had to try that, right? So the recipe calls for 3 grated potatoes, to which I add 2 cups of milk. Lest we forget that this is blood bologna that we're making, it also calls for 2 cups of blood. Now, I got my blood already coagulated, so I added a little bit of vinegar, and the acidity helps to kind of break it up. And then I shoved it through a sieve, which helps to break it up more. Recipe also calls for 3 cups of white flour and 1 cup of graham flour, sifted together with a half teaspoon of baking soda, a half teaspoon of pepper, 3 tablespoons of salt, and a tablespoon of allspice. I don't really have a sifter, so I'm just using this mesh sieve. And I stir in 2 cups of leaf fat. Now, I wasn't actually able to get leaf fat, which is sort of the intra-abdominal fat around the internal organs of the pig. I wasn't able to get that, so I've got fat back that I've cut up into cubes. Once it's all combined, it turns into this sort of Pepto-Pink goo. The recipe actually tells you to sew a muslin bag to pour this all into. I didn't have muslin, and as my home ec teacher in high school can tell you, I'm not really that much of a tailor. So what I did instead was I used several layers of cheesecloth. Just ladle some in there, and then gather the corners and edges together and tied with a piece of string. Not too tightly. You want to leave a little room. That baking soda means that it's going to actually swell a little bit in cooking. Place this little satchel of goodness in boiling water, turn the heat down just a little bit, and just simmer it / steam it for 2 hours. After 2 hours, remove from the boiling water, and I would recommend putting this in the fridge and letting it cool for a couple of hours at least before actually cutting the string and unwrapping it. You don't really gain anything by unwrapping it now. I have to admit I was a little dismayed when I pulled the blood bologna out of the boiling water and cut open the cheesecloth. It was still kind of soft, and it was very sticky and very tacky to the touch. It's a little dismaying, but after several hours in the refrigerator, it's set up nicely, and so it is actually quite sliceable. Now, the proof of the pudding, so to speak. Is it any good? And the answer is no. It's salty. There's a little bit of porkiness to it, so that fat back is definitely there. I really don't taste the blood that much. There's not much of an iron taste that you usually get, that metallic taste. But there's not really that much flavor there. So unfortunately, because of all the potato and the flour, there's so much filler to this. It really is more pudding than it is blood or pork or anything. And other than the salt, it's really quite bland. If I concentrate, I can taste the pepper, but the allspice, nothing. And really, I don't taste the blood at all. So, since you may have noticed, if you were watching closely, I did a second one. And basically, I just took the remaining filling and I added more spices. garlic powder, onion powder, more pepper, uh, some rubbed sage. Um, I think I put a little bit of nutmeg and cinnamon in there just for kicks. And I came up with this. Looks the same, but maybe seasoning was really all you needed. Because again, the original recipe wasn't horrible, wasn't gag inducing or anything, but it also wasn't good. There wasn't really that much flavor to it, so maybe adding more will help. Mm. So unfortunately, it's still too salty. So I think blood spam. There's definitely more going on, um, especially on the finish. You definitely the garlic and onion definitely lingers. And actually, it does taste more porky um, than the original recipe. So, more seasoning did in fact enhance the flavor. Um, it's not bad if this is what I was offered at some Scandinavian church luncheon or something. um, I wouldn't turn it down. I'll finish this piece. Mm. I don't know that I would go out of my way to try it again. However, it gets me to thinking, this blood bologna. Mm. I think it would definitely. I think it would benefit from being treated like an actual bologna, which is to say, once you actually have it in a more appropriate casing, to actually uh, hang this in a smokehouse. It'll dry it out a little bit more, help it firm up, but also give it that sort of a woodsy, smoky flavor in addition to the salt and the spices. And the recipe does say that if you wanted to make it sweet, you could. You could add some brown sugar or raisins to this, and that sort of takes it into a boiled pudding direction. But if you wanted to keep it in the savory direction, smoking this would definitely be an option. But even after making these two, I still had a lot of that pink goo left over. And I hate wasting things. So I thought, well, this is a recipe redemption. What can I add to that? Now that I've added the spices to it and made it sort of taste a little bit better, what can I add to that to just make it better? And I realized, well, blood is a part of the pig that we often throw away. And what do you do with the parts of the pig that you throw away? Well, a lot of times they end up in things like hot dogs, right? But another thing that you can do with the parts of the pig that you usually don't keep is something that the Pennsylvania Dutch have given us. And it's called scrapple. Basically, it's taking pig parts, a little bit of aromatic veg, cornmeal, and water. You make a mush out of it. You cook it down until it's nice and thick. Then you put it into, and you cook it down with lots of pig fat. And then you pour it into a loaf pan and refrigerate or freeze that sucker. And basically what they do is they take slices of this sort of quasi polenta meatloaf thing, take slices of it, fry it on a griddle, and have that for breakfast with eggs. So I'm thinking, why don't we make a blood scrapple? I've got some of the fat back left over from cooking the blood bologna, and actually has some skin with it, which will be absolutely perfect because then I'll be able to actually have little bits of cracklings in this dish. So just saute up some of the fat back, throw in some aromatic veg, and I think some apple. Apple and pork go together really well. Um, Add some water, add some corn meal, cook that into a gruel, stir that in, and because blood needs to be handled carefully, I want to make sure the blood is fully cooked. Usually with scrapple, you kind of boil everything together, and and then you cook it again later. I don't know if I'm actually going to get to this for breakfast, so I want to make sure that the blood is fully cooked. So I'm actually going to pour in all this into a loaf pan and bake the whole thing. I think because with all the other starches and the extra moisture in it, that it'll be okay. It won't dry out. But that way I'll be sure it's fully cooked, and then I'll fry it up. And we'll see how blood scrapple. We start our scrapple mixture by frying the remainder of the fat back. Once your fat back just starts to color and you've rendered out a bit of the fat, add your veg. You're going to be adding the flesh of one apple, diced, and 1 to 1.5 stalks of celery, also diced. And we're just going to sweat those. You don't really need those to color much at all. Just want to soften them and get the flavor to develop. Add in what ended up being 3 cups of water. And then 1 cup of yellow cornmeal. And stir vigorously to make sure you don't develop any lumps. Now, a note here, since I'm just taking the blood bologna recipe and converting it into a sort of scrapple, this is going to be a little bit different than if you were just making blood scrapple. To do the blood scrapple, you would just leave out what I'm about to do and instead just replace 2 of the 3 cups of water with blood and cook it that way. So once the cornmeal has absorbed some of the liquid and this mixture thickens into kind of a runny porridge, I'm pouring this into the remainder of the blood bologna mixture and stirring to combine. Since blood spoils really easily, I want to make sure this is cooked all the way through. So I'm pouring this into my pre-greased loaf pan, and instead of just sticking this straight into the fridge, I'm going to put this into a 350-degree oven and bake for 1.5 hours. I want to make sure this is fully cooked before I cool it and put it into storage. A normal scrapple, you would actually just pour it in the loaf pan and refrigerate or freeze until you needed it. So, lessons learned with the blood scrapple. Because this isn't really a full scrapple recipe, it's basically adapting the blood bologna recipe to make scrapple. It's sort of taken on the consistency of refried beans. So it's kind of sticky, and therefore, if you do it exactly this way, you're either going to need more oil in the pan than I used, or you need to use a better nonstick pan than I used. But in any case, blood scrapple. Appley. Even after all that, it's still kind of salty. It's toned it down just a little bit. It's diluted it some, but it's sort of testament to just how much salt went into the original recipe, because it's still, I can still taste the salt. It's not overpowering, but it's there. The aromatic vegetables definitely helping. I could actually even taste the celery, which is kind of amazing. The fat back with the skin, the cracklins, even though they definitely soften up from being basically boiled with this stuff, they still have a nice chew to them. So there's a texture component there. There's a variety of textures in each bite. Mm. Yeah, it's definitely rich and creamy. And again, if you were to do an honest to goodness blood scrapple recipe, do like I described in the video and not this. Instead of actually adding potato and flour and milk and all that, just replace some of the water that you would make scrapple with blood. It will add liquid. It will also add a thickening agent. It will add flavor, protein and iron, and I think it will. I think it will actually be a darker color than this. The blood that actually got it added to the blood bologna recipe has been diluted multiple times here, so it's almost a secondary ingredient. It's still there. Obviously, I didn't blend it up until it was fully liquid again, so there are chunks of the blood, which, depending on how you look at things, is either a plus or a minus. I don't mind it. It's interesting. Now, in order to make sure that I had enough, I actually got 2 containers of the pig blood. So, I'm thinking in the coming days there will be another video where I experiment a little more on exactly what you can use blood for. So stay tuned for that. This should be interesting. But in the meantime, this isn't a bad redemption for the blood bologna. I think I'll tinker with the recipe a little bit more. Obviously, not start off with the blood bologna and try to make scrapple out of it. But I think the blood scrapple is something I could get used to having on a more regular basis. And who knows? Maybe blood may become a more popular item in your local butcher aisle at the grocery store. Maybe, maybe not. But if it does, I'm ready. There are worse ways to go. So, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please click subscribe below. And if you've already subscribed, I also recommend that you click the little bell next to the subscribe button. What that does is notifies you whenever I post a new video. That way, you won't have to go looking. So until next time, I'm Mike Uyak for Recipe Redemption. Thanks for watching.